Hey, Dad, can I borrow your plane?
Get this thing down to my size. How many here have even ever heard of Dicey Miller? Okay, that's pretty good. The rest of you, I assume, don't have a clue who she was. Well, in the early days of this struggling little organization, I had just bought a Yankee. 4 of us used to get together and chase tails on Sunday morning. And we decided that maybe we ought to have a Yankee Drivers Club. And that was kind of the conception of this thing. And it struggled on for about a year with a few people getting together and flying. Then I wound up actually getting officially in the airplane business in the end of 1975. And shortly thereafter, met a lady who had introduced the Yankees to the Everett and Seattle area in Washington. This was Dicey Miller. She had been chief pilot of a flight school in Huntsville, Alabama, and when the Yankees first came out, and they had several of them down there, and she fell in love with the aircraft, thought they were the greatest training aircraft that she'd ever flown. She had a fair amount of experience. At that time, I don't know the exact amount of training dual given she had, but I know that when I started my flight school, it was like 29,000 hours of instructing time. She had almost 40,000 hours total time. Anyway, we started, with one Yankee, got another one, or got an AA-1B and an AA-1A, I guess, right off the bat. And so she got involved with helping coach me basically in how to put the school together. And we were also starting to try to get some type of resemblance of an organization going. So she took the horns and organized the American Yankee Association's first meeting. She was sending out a newsletter, starting to try to contact people all over the country. And she was working for Boeing at the time, so she had time to come over and work with us. And I can honestly say that with trying to get a flight school started, a fledgling dealership, joining forces with an existing operation in California, I really didn't have the time to devote to trying to put an organization together, although we were, when a student signed up, they got an AYA application with their student packet and were instructed to sign it. And I think the first meeting we had, the 18 of us that were there, I think about half were either students or former students of one or the other of the organizations. And Dicey called the meeting to order underneath a shade tree at Merced, California, and we officially had an organization. The next 2 years, Dicey served as executive secretary and put out the newsletter, did most of the communication, spent an awful lot of time buttonholing people and working with people, a lot of late nights discussing how this thing was going to evolve. And the AYA was, through the next 2 years, went through its infancy until we had our first, it was actually our third convention, which was held at Appleton, Wisconsin. The first 2 were at Merced. And at that time, we actually had officer elections. We had a president, we had a vice president, we elected a secretary, or appointed, I guess, a secretary-treasurer at that time. And so it went on from there. Well, Dicey was a real strong fixture, and like I say, I consider her the mother of this organization. And after about the first 4 years, she didn't have a lot to do with it. She actually retired from Boeing and moved to the Phoenix area, between Phoenix and Long Beach, I guess, back and forth. She worked a while for Hughes, for Evergreen Airlines. She was a weights engineer, and she designed weight and balance programs. But prior to her devotion to the AYA, she developed the first curriculum that American Aviation had for flight training. She had the first all-Yankee flight school in the country, with 9 Yankees and 1 Mooney. The Mooney was there for complex training. She was quite well known and honored through the early days of American Aviation. She was invited to fly the first AA-1A prototype trainer, which, now bear in mind, she liked the Yankee. She had some real cute quips that she used to say, and she'd tell about this that Roy Garrison asked her when she got down from flying it, "Well, Dicey, what do you think of our new trainer?" She said, "I think you took an absolutely perfectly good airplane and just ruined it." She liked the feel of the high-performance wing. She was honored later on by the Weights and Balance Engineers Society, International Society of Weights Engineers, I think it's called, and which is apparently is a kind of elite group. But they, although she never had actually any type of a degree in this, she wound up developing a loading structure system that is, I understand, adopted by the majority of the airlines. It's a very simple graph system. You just plug in the numbers and you got it. And it's supposed to work for everything from a J3 Cub to a 747. And so she used to pride herself on, as she called it, making a career as a woman in a man's world without compromising anything. I know she was quite an inspiration to some of our young lady instructors we had when we had the flight school. And she would call them together and teach them the little tricks that she called the tricks of the trade. And one of the favorite things that I thought was neat, all the time she was instructing, she would never wear perfume. She would wear men's cologne. She said that a guy had enough trouble learning to fly, and his wife letting him learn to fly, especially if he was flying with a female instructor, without going home smelling like perfume. So she wore men's cologne, men's aftershave. And I remember one little situation. I asked her to sit in on some counseling. I had a little love triangle developed at our flight school between a female instructor and a male student, and a female instructor, a male student, and a male instructor. And things were getting a little intense, and I remember her sitting down there and saying, "Now, look, we all have 2 love lives. One of them involves an airplane, the other one doesn't. Now keep it that way, and you get along in this career." Well, anyway, her son was supposed to have sent me some information of a lot of her background. A lot of what I know is from some late night sessions in the bar and various other conversations, and a lot of war stories. Her telling of flying, she was a test pilot when she was 19 years old for Lockheed. She would fly in P-38s off the assembly line. Later she, I understand, flew P-51s for North American. She actually delivered some of these aircraft to Britain in World War II. And I remember telling a story of of flying a P-38 in under very inclement, very IFR conditions with not much equipment that they had to work with back then, and managed to not only find the airport, broke out at about 150 feet and landed. And they knew that there was an airplane due in and was overdue, and so they figured that it'd probably gone down. And so it was quite a commotion when they heard an airplane, and this airplane actually pops out of the soup and lands and comes taxiing in. It's a P-38. And she said it really drew a crowd when she popped the canopy and crawled out of the thing at 5'2" with long red pigtails. Another little story, her and a couple of my instructors were setting up at the bar at the jet deck at Payne Field in Everett, Washington one night after the day's flying was over, and we had been doing some AYA business, I think putting out a newsletter or something, and we were setting up there, tossing down a few and discussing things like the pros and cons of the new biannual flight review that had just been recently introduced, and whether or not it should be more than a logbook entry. And I made the comment that, I kind of got the feeling that people will sign this thing off in the back of the coffee shop or something because Joe knows that Fred's been flying for 50 years. I said, he probably got some old gummers around here that still learned to fly in a Jenny. And she said, watch that crap, son. As it turned out, she did learn to fly in a Curtiss Jenny in 1932 or 33, something like that. She was like 14 years old. Worst airplanes for flying time. It was at where John Wayne Airport is now. It was a grass field then. And she told a story about getting caught on top one time when the soup moved in. And she was out soloing. She had very few hours. And she did what she had heard the higher time pilots talk about in the old Jennies, is you just slow them up and spin them down through the soup until you break out, and then you recover and land. So she knew about where she was, and on the ground, I guess they could hear this airplane flying around, and they got out. And sure enough, here she come popping out at about 2,500 feet and proceeded to come in and land. They all come out, where in the world did you learn that? Well, I heard so-and-so talk about doing it, so it must have worked. Anyway, there's a lot of stories about Dicey. She passed away April 3rd, 83. 3 times retired, still working as a consultant. And I understand from her son that she had some type of a fall or something and busted a few things, and I guess it was downhill from there. I talked to her about 1.5 years ago, and I said, well, how are you doing, Dicey? She said, well, it's really kind of embarrassing at my age to be doing as well as I am. She said, I got some things that don't work like they used to, but I get around pretty good. And she was looking forward to coming to another AYA convention sometime when one was close enough. Some of us were trying to remember when the last one, I know she was at was what?
Was it St. Augustine?
I think she was there. I know she was at Sun River and possibly she was, I think she was at Bowling Green.
St. Augustine.
And she was at St. Augustine also.
She was at St. Augustine.
Yeah.
I know that, but I don't know
She came
where.
to a Southwest Regional fly-in about 1.5 years ago.
Really? Okay. But anyway, she was very proud of this organization. We put in a proposal to the board. They didn't have time to really act on it this year due to some other pressing matters. But next year we're going to come up with some way to honor Dicey in some type of a Lifetime Achievement Award, or at least that's the proposal. So with that, have a nice flight, Dicey.